Okay, this is a session that I've been really looking forward to. Does the way you report really affect investment decisions? And I'm really excited about the speakers that we've got this, and I'm going to invite them up on stage in just a couple of moments. But I'm just going to briefly set the scene for this. A little recap on corporate reporting and the information you provide as a company that investors use. This matrix here puts the company at the centre. We look at all the information that comes from a company that an investor might look at. The quadrants are framed by the channel and the timing of the communication. So you can very simply here, a lot of the communication you'll recognise are through established and traditional channels, mainly organised around the financial calendar, with a little bit more flexibility around when you have your meetings with management meetings with investors and maybe capital markets days. But as we've seen today, the world has changed. Digital technology means that you can talk to all of your investors all the time. Social media opens up the opportunity for an ongoing dialogue. I guess one of the advantages of that, potentially, and we'll discuss this in a moment, is speed. The disadvantage, of course, or the trade-off, is assurance. The annual report sits very much in this quadrant, traditional channel, set piece. You generally know when the annual report is coming out. But the world is changing, and we like to explore how the investment world is changing and what it means for corporate reporting. So, without further ado, I'm going to invite our speakers, our panel, up on the stage. First person I'd like to invite up is Meryam, who is responsible for social research at Legal and General Investment Management, one of the largest investment managers in the UK. Second speaker I'm going to invite up is Niamh Wholley, a senior ESG analyst at SocGen's SRI team. Last but not least, Mike Tyrell from SRI Connect, someone who absolutely knows about how companies interact with their investors. He helps companies negotiate that space. Mike, thanks very much. Mike, come over here, because I know we're gonna do a little piece here, aren't we, while I take a seat.
Indeed.
I'll leave you with Mike, and then we'll have a little discussion in a moment.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you, everybody, for being here this afternoon, for staying on to hear about investors. My name's Mike Tyrell. I have been a sustainable investment analyst for 18 years now. I started out on the buy side at Jupiter Asset Management. Then I went to work on the sell side at HSBC Investment Research and Citi Global Equities. And I now run a research website called SRI Connect, which helps companies communicate on sustainability and corporate governance issues to investors and analysts. I live in Sean's top right quadrant. It's social, it's direct, it's immediate communications with investors. What I've been asked to do today is to give a little bit of background to the subject of investor company communications on sustainability, because everybody will tell you that it is difficult, that it is complicated, that investors want different things. They are bandits. It is unbelievably easy if you just take your investor relations disciplines and apply them to the communication of sustainability and corporate governance information. Before we start that, it should be noticed that these bandits typically tell you what investors want. There's a very different approach going on here today. We've actually brought proper, real, actual investors with actual faces and actual voices and actual ears, and you can ask them yourselves. But before we meet them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out a little bit about the state of where we're all at in terms of direct communications on sustainability to investors. So could you all stand up, please? Everybody who didn't produce a sustainability or corporate responsibility or integrated report in the last 12 months, please sit down. Secondly, could you sit down if you didn't actively send it to your largest investors? You didn't have to do it yourself, but you weren't pretty sure that somebody pressed a button which sent it by email to them. Okay. So quite a lot of people did a lot of work, but didn't actually send it to the audience. I think going back to the previous point about knowing your audience. Before you did that, sit down if you didn't do a little bit of a targeting exercise to work out which of your investors were interested in sustainability and corporate governance issues. Went through the list. Worked. Oh my goodness. So you sent it out, but you sent it to probably the wrong people. Okay. Now sit down. If you didn't, starting to see some winners here, aren't we? If you didn't organise a little round of meetings with your largest investors on the subject of your sustainability corporate governance information. So, goodness, there we go. And sit down, please, if you didn't meet with Meryam or Niamh at some stage in the last 12 months.
Just a question. I didn't meet Meryam, but I met her team. Is that all right?
That's good enough.
You, sir, are utterly the winner. Thank you. Going back to Sean's point, Meryam is the senior environmental and social analyst at one of the largest asset managers in Europe. You didn't meet with her. Niamh is one of the top-rated team on sustainability research on the sell side. You didn't meet with her. Sean's now going to ask them why you didn't, take us through some questions, and hopefully next year we'll have a few more people on their feet for a little longer. Back over to you, Sean.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Mike. Thanks so much for that. Let's kick this off. First question to Meryam and Niamh. It'd be good to get just a little bit of background in terms of how you go around gathering information from companies, the sort of information you look for, and how you use the information you receive. So perhaps, Meryam, if you could kick that off.
It's very easy to put this one bracket, sort of bucket called investors, but as you know, there's no such thing. We are very, very different from each other. So Legal and General Investment Management, for those of you who don't know us, we are very large in terms of assets, but about 60% of about 50% of what we manage is in index tracking funds, what we call passive funds. And particularly in equities, the vast majority of assets are index tracking funds. And I don't want to get into a conversation about whether if you're passive, you can be an active fund manager or not, because I would totally argue for it, but it's not the time. But it's important that you know that, because what that means is, yes, we can't divest out of you. If you're in the index, we invested in you. It also means that we have quite a lot of voting power, and we probably have met your chairman and CEO and the likes. We also have very long-term views on things, because we're not going to be divested out of you. We're not a hedge fund who comes in trying to make a quick buck and then leave tomorrow. That's not the kind of relationship we have. So we're really, really interested in your business being successful in 10, 20, 30 years' time, because that's in our interests. So that's the one side of the business, index or passive funds. The other side of it is active. And that's probably where you want to really appeal by what you're doing through your reporting or IR activities to sort of say, we're a fantastic company, invest in us. I do that work, try what we call ESG integration, so environmental and social governance integration, where I talk with active equity fund managers, and also we have a very large holdings in active fixed income. So even from a bondholder's point of view, we are addressing your environmental and social governance activities and performance. In fact, a vast majority of my work is actually working with fixed income analysts and portfolio managers. So I forgot your question. I just want to sort of set the scene. How do you gather the information?
That's good. Yeah, it's good to know. It's useful background. It's good to know we've got long-term investors in the room as well.
It's actually really
interesting in the kind of information you're looking for.
Yeah, so depending on whether you are looking from the passive or the active point, the information we look for is very different. In passive, as I said, we invested in every company in FTSE or shares. We don't have time to read your reports, unfortunately. We just want to be able to benchmark you against your competitors and have some kind of a quantitative measuring system. And for that, we fed in 6 different external providers' information, all of which originates from your report, but they've either extracted the numbers or they've analyzed your report and given us the data points to feed it. So we've got this internal data that tells you, what kind of things that you report on and how you compare against your peers in the same industry. So that kind of triggers a lot of the engagements, and we can sort of say to you, well, your competitor does this, I don't understand why you can't do the same. So that's the kind of conversation that the data kind of brings up. There's a whole bunch of other things that we do, but I'm just giving you from a reporting point of view the comparability and the quantitative side is incredibly important when you have a very, very large set of investments. On the active side, you're obviously trying to beat the benchmark. You're trying to pick the winners against the benchmark. And there, for example, in active equities, we have a very concentrated portfolio. So we might pick one or two, what we think are going to be the winners per sector. And there we'll be reading your report line by line, analyzing it. We'll be meeting your chairman, CEO, FD, maybe head of different departments, and really understanding some of the business drivers. So the way we would engage with you, through the report is very, very different because we don't want to get anything wrong in that sense. We talk to fund managers about quite detailed things that is not in the report and ask the companies, one, why it isn't. And if you could disclose more, and so on and so forth. So yeah, very different approaches depending on the type of mandates that we manage.
Meryam, just before I sort of ask Niamh this question, are there particular things that constantly aren't in the report that you're looking for?
So one of the things, so we have a big team of sort of corporate governance analysts, and they are day in, day out reading your executive pay report and all this kind of things that I personally wouldn't have the patience for because it's very, very long, but they're very good at scanning and getting information out. But from me, I'm responsible a lot more for the environmental and social. And somebody else said early on that we shouldn't call it non-financial. It absolutely shouldn't be called non-financial. It's something that would eventually be financially impactful to the business. Otherwise, please don't even talk about it. So the term is important. But anyway, so when I'm looking at that, some things I look for. One, your risk section, what you're identifying to be your business risks. And if you got like 300 pages of environmental and social things, but none of that is in your risk, or the risk section is just very broadly societal impact or something like that, I don't think the board has really talked about this. I don't think they really understand where they sit in relation to the society in terms of how they interact with their clients, and they haven't really thought about materiality. So to me, the risk section says something about the level of discussions that have been had internally. So that's the first point. And also, usually there's a separate sustainability report, but there are some sections within annual reports that gets embedded in. So we have a look at to see what they think is important and question that, because a lot of that is boilerplate. And you think, why did you put that in? Did you really think it was that material? Has that really changed? Why did you put this case study? I mean, what is this in context of? So, I mean, it's sort of, I might sound negative, but what I'm trying to say is I can't see the thought process through why they pick certain topics. And if I don't see that, I start to think, oh, maybe the conversations are still a little bit premature.
Okay, that's really interesting. So I think that is an issue sometimes. People put things in the annual report without really thinking through and what it's actually doing there. So it's good to hear it from the sharp end. Thanks. That's a little bit on the buy side. Niamh, tell us a little bit about the sell side and the sort of process you do.
We obviously help investors analyse the ESG performance of companies. Our investor clients, Meryam is one of our clients, but our investor clients are in the UK, US, France. Those are three major markets, and then also other European countries. But our job is to basically do deep dive analysis on sectors to compare the companies, or on thematic issues that are material. So we assist our clients with the analysis. And I guess my starting point, we're big drivers of integration within our analyst team. And I'm very fortunate that they do get very involved with us. So when we sit down, one of the first things we do before we analyse a sector or choose a theme is sit down with the coverage analyst to identify the most material issues for that sector. What is, you know, if it's food, it's obesity. If it's telcos, it's freedom and privacy. If it's shale, it's water scarcity. And that's really my starting point. We don't kick off thematic research unless we have agreement with the coverage analyst that, yes, we do want further information on this. So that's kind of our starting point. And then our next phase is we do read your reports in depth. You know, just to give you an idea of this, I mentioned about working with the coverage analyst, but in my last report, I actually identified my theme by reading the reports and seeing that there was a change within this sector in what was a defence mode 3-4 years ago to a search for growth. And that was coming out through the ESG reporting. And when I went to the coverage analyst, they were saying the same on the financial side. So my starting point is I read through the reports. Then we also have a third party. There's MSCI, Sustainalytics and others that help us crunch the data. But our work as brokers is that we are providing additional information that, you know, an analysis that isn't existing. So we look at the third party. I look at your reports. I always download. This is like my preparation for the research. So it's annual report. It's any of your filings in the US. It's your sustainability report. It's your capital markets day. Always the capital markets day. That's something I would not do the analysis without. And then I go to the analyst to get the analyst to identify other sources that I can use. Through that research process, then I identify metrics, which I again agree with the analyst. And we start developing a profile around those metrics that are basically to do with the theme. And the final phase that we do is that we do the work. We gather all of the information, but then an important part of the process is we always send these profiles to the companies and say, we obviously don't show the scoring, the weighting that we apply, but we say, this is the information that we've gathered from publicly available information. Can you confirm that you know, we have gathered the information? And probably one of the best reports I ever read through was when the person actually, we have a very high response rate. It's typically about 67 to 70%. When I did banks and insurance, I got a 95% response rate from the companies. But in one of my last reports, I got a response from the company that said, we strive to ensure that our reporting is comprehensive, it's focused on the material issues. So we're quite confident that the information that you're looking for is publicly available, and you've identified all the sites. And the response was correct. The profile was complete. I had all the information that I needed. But often people are linking me all over their sites to different information that wasn't in the report. So.
That's good. I'm going to bring Mike in a moment to look at the wider thing. We're sort of talking a lot about annual reports, but just one of the questions that's been submitted from a few members in the audience is around social media and continuous research and information from the companies. Clearly not really happening at the moment, but is that something that's of any value to you guys? And
from my perspective, I work for a bank and there's a lot of firewalls.
Yeah.
So I have had instances where I've had to download something at home from a corporate website and send it to myself at work so that I can gain access as the quickest way to access it. We have no access to social media. We can't even look at our emails on LinkedIn. It's blocked by the bank. So that has caused, with the digital, you have to keep in mind that sometimes we may not have access to it.
So do you think that rules out this whole area, you know, certainly maybe for now, but for the future? Or do you think it's something that you can sort of get around working, you know, looking outside the bank at all? Or?
I mean, possibly the bank will change in time, but you must remember it's a bank. Security is key, and, you know, we can get special permission. It takes about a week. If I do want to access something, once I was barred from something because it said the state of Virginia. It took us a while to work out why we were blocked within that. But right now, that is the reality of it. But I would think the bank itself is trying to make us more flexible and more mobile. So that will change in time. But right now, the reality is that anything too advanced on the digital actually blocks my access to it.
Meryam, what about the issue around quarterly reporting? You know, it's already been mentioned that it perhaps generates short-term behaviour. Is that something that you've found? Is that something that you're looking for? Or?
It's a very, very pertinent topic for me, because I don't know if your chairman has received a letter from my CEO recently. Has anybody got a letter from us? Oh, that's unfortunate, because we just wrote to FTSE 350 companies chairman, hopefully all of you, saying, if you don't think quarterly reports are adding value to your business, we don't need it. And this is on the back of, obviously, the removal of the regulatory burden that happened back in November last year. And I've had to do a lot of discussions with our head of equities, head of fixed income, our CFO, and everybody said, do we really need this? Now, with a lot of caveats on the side, broadly, no. Buy side isn't really taking into account what's in the quarterly reports. And I think it's one of those things that's just there. And you just think, how much value does it add? So we have come to the conclusion that unless you really feel like you have to, maybe because you have to file the same stuff to the American regulator, or that your competitors are doing, whatever the reason, or you're very cyclical as a business, unless you have a very good reason to, and if you don't want to, and if you don't think it's adding value, absolutely remove it. So we wanted to give that support to the company. So if you don't want to do it, just talk to your chairman. He's got that letter.
Okay, good. So we're staying very much in this space on the matrix.
And I'm talking to other investors, so it doesn't just come from us, because you probably need to hear from a whole bunch of investors. But I was actually at an investor roundtable the other day, and without naming names, really large investors, pretty much all of them said, yeah, we don't really need it. So it is just completely ridiculous.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of relief people in this audience who love reporting but don't want to do it all year round. Mike, let's bring you into the conversation, because clearly reporting doesn't exist in isolation. You know, we started with a lot of people standing up when you did your audience piece, and you know, where are companies going wrong? Why aren't they getting through to people like Niamh and Meryam? What they should be thinking about once the report is out there?
Oh no. Listen to the last presentation. Listen to Cam. You start with the audience. You don't start with the report. So you should be thinking about next year now. I think the simplest thing they're doing wrong is they're not encouraging or asking IR to run the sustainable investor communications process, because they are investors. Therefore, they belong within investor relations. Now, a lot of investor relations teams are reluctant to get involved because they think it's all going to be about animal testing, which we've heard from Niamh. It manifestly isn't. It's about material business factors, which we've heard from Meryam. It's a core part of the way they think about businesses. So if you get investor relations to run the process and then bring in your sustainability, your corporate responsibility, your technology, your areas of expertise as appropriate for the content, then the problem gets fixed, because your investor relations department already knows that you target investors, you communicate to them, you publish a report, you make sure that you go out and see the big ones. You have a process of prioritising between the important investors and the important analysts and the less relevant investors and analysts. And then, most importantly, when you've done your communications, you take a break, you stop. you get on with running the business, and then you come back and do it again. So I think if it's a single thing, it's just transplant the investor relations processes across to communicating on sustainability.
Sorry, can I say something? Just on that, I mean, a couple of things. One, you're not necessarily going to see me because we've got thousands of investments, but that doesn't mean that your information is not feeding through to our system. So your end goal should not be to see the ESG person. I mean, your end goal is for your materiality analysis to feature in your strategy and for that to be communicated through your CEO. As long as that's done, you don't have to necessarily have a round table on the side. There are exceptions to the case with very, very sort of at-risk sectors in terms of very, very risky operations where we need a lot more reassurance around. I mean, oil and gas right now, there's a lot of meetings going on. Extractives have just generally had that. But there are sectors, it's just we know that you're doing generally a good job, you know, and you're not going to necessarily hear from me. So we're getting your information through different channels, not always directly.
I think perhaps just 2 points on that. So firstly, Meryam spoke of 6 sources. Now, I'm sure she'll tell you who those sources are, but these are often the people that will be sending you questionnaires and requests for information and please will you check. The thing that companies typically do is they try to respond to all of these requests and then they panic and they shut down and they do none of them and then they try to do them all again. You apply the investor relations process to that, where you publish the report, you do a webcast. You invite all of these research providers to join that call, to ask any questions they've got, and then that's it. You tell them you'll do it again next year. I think the other thing that's worth picking up on is that Meryam talks about companies particularly at risk. It's also, or implying downside risk. It's also worth noticing there are a number of investors out there that are looking for upside investment opportunities. So if you're a company where sustainability is delivering significant revenue enhancement or is enabling you to cut costs, then there are also investors willing to hear that message as well. I'm not going to assume, I may assume that's you as well, but I think it's important to remember it's not always about, when you talk about sustainability, people always think, oh, they're the miserable guys in the corner who drink the bad beer and, you know, it's just boring about the state of the world. No, there's just as much opportunity there, and you're a bit of an idiot investor if you think that any aspect of economic activity is only about downside.
Can I ask you about how companies should shape their message? What you like to see in a convincing investment case, perhaps communicated through the annual report or certainly reflected in the annual report. You've mentioned materiality so far. That's clearly key. Do you think companies are talking about the right things in their reports? Are you having more conversations about materiality?
You probably read more reports.
Yeah. You know, a really good report, you can see where they've done the work on the strategy, the materiality. It's really systematic. You know, if it's something like data privacy, it's right through to the company is telling us what they do in terms of their staff training, their policies, what they do in terms of their suppliers. So for me, a very a good report, it's quite short. Probably the ones that frustrate me the most are the ones that are 150 pages with all sorts of information that don't really lead anywhere. They're just ticking the box of what's important for that sector. So I think I was here for the earlier session in which one of the speakers noted that it's all about the strategy, the board. I think as someone who reads a lot of these reports, you can really pick that up from the company. They're not, you know, it's not a lot of information. It's focused on what the board believes are the most important ones. And again, this is why I often as well look at the Capital Markets Day, because typically it's not just within the ESG space, but it's also within the whole strategy of the business and what they're talking to financial analysts about.
Cool. What's your thought on materiality, Meryam?
I mean, I think I completely echo that. I mean, some companies come to us and say, can you tell us what the materiality themes are for us and what you think is the sort of materiality for us? And I'm like, well, if you're asking that question, you haven't done the work. I'm not going to know your business. There is no way investors would understand your business. And you almost shouldn't put that much emphasis on what investors think. Investors will be basically interested if that's going to translate into your performance in whatever the time frame they're looking at. Everything else is a little bit of detail. So really, your materiality is about how you liaise with your clients, not just customers today, but of the future, how your products and services are, meeting those needs, and how managing environmental and social impacts will enhance your business over time. If you've done that work, that is your materiality. You don't need a stamp of approval from us, and that will come across very well in your report. So, report is, at the end of the day, it's a reflection of the internal discussion. You can't, put a band-aid on something that's broken inside.
Great. Guys, I'm going to wrap up this session in a moment.
Could I just add last thing to add to Meryam's point there? I think you're absolutely right. You put your business needs first. Don't be misled by the data monkeys that ask you for the water consumption of a bank. It's not relevant. They're wrong. Be confident about that. How you deliver the material information, get the head of investor relations, the head of sustainability in a room together and have somebody to keep the door locked until they have worked out what are the strategic direction of the business, what are the main sustainability themes, and what's the overlap? Because that is the message you take out on sustainability to investors. And it often takes somebody from outside to force them into that room to have that meeting for it to happen. Once you do that, I think you need to listen. Then, once you've defined what you want, then you listen and read the research that's being written about you. Once you've done that, I don't think you'll go far wrong on materiality.
Okay, good. That sounds like a good takeaway for this. Well, let me just ask you quickly, Niamh first and then Meryam, one thing that you would like to see communication from companies, whether it's in the annual report or some other medium, what's the one thing that you'd like them to see them change that would make reporting more useful for you?
Just one.
Just one.
As much as I appreciate that every company in every sector is very different, as a global investor, being able to compare and contrast the information is very important. So once you've done all that fantastic internal discussion, please try to pick indicators that are globally used. Don't come up with your own ones. We talked about 6 data providers. The baseline is, for example, ESG section of Bloomberg. Make sure that is looking pretty good tomorrow. And because if you don't have the information that allows us to compare, your information won't be compared and you'll be disadvantaged in the scoring process. And not everybody would have the time to call up and find out what's going on. So, I know there are movements around GRI and some of the standardization. Please get involved and try to come up with some kind of a framework that works for your whole industry. And then try to communicate your message through that lens.
Okay, great.
Industry metrics are very useful. I think I'm going to go back to my original point, which is because I read so many of these that it is, there's nothing I hate more than seeing a 150-page report where I am going page after page looking for the information. I have to read through it all and I'm not finding the message. As I say, it's just tick boxing. For our sector, this issue is important. You mentioned the data monkeys. It's very much about just throwing all of the relevant information out there. I think Mike's his key message, that it's about you, your company, your message, your strategy. That's what I'm actually looking for in the report. And those are the reports that actually really add to my process. And those are the ones typically where, even though I may get additional information from the company that is an important input to my research, typically it should be all the key issues within that very concise piece.
So just to wrap up, while these guys leave the stage, I think a key message coming through is make it concise. Focus it around the strategy, get the metrics right to support that. And also this interesting point about materiality. It's clearly a big issue for investors. They can tell what's material. And if it's in there and there's a question mark about that, that's coming through. So I think special attention to materiality. So thank you very much, guys.